Hey there, everyone. Welcome. Apologies for the slight delay. Today we have hopefully what will be a fantastic webinar, AP Music Theory Bootcamp webinar, where we'll be kind of like looking at some ways to get access to some of the amazing free resources in the Music First classroom and having a bit of explore of those, navigating those so you can get the most out of those free materials, and also unpacking a few of the questions from the 2025 exam that will hopefully kind of set you up for success there. My name's Tim Wilson from Music First and Aurelia and Musician. I'll be leading you through most of this today with a bit of assistance from my colleagues. So to start off with, for those of you that don't have access to the classroom, I'll just share some details for you. And I'll pop them into the comments area. Obviously, if you have any questions or issues during the webinar, please sing out. I will just share these details with my colleague, who will then pop them in the group chat there. I don't seem to have access to do that. Natalia, if you could please assist. I'll also bring these details up on screen here for you. So basically, there's a QR code there. There is a URL and also your class code there, invitation to basically join the class and have access to those materials. Hopefully they will shortly appear in the comments area there for you. Beautiful, thank you very much. So yeah, jump into the comments area to grab that URL and class code there. Basically, once you go to that URL, you will see a form that looks a little bit like this. Simply punch in the invitation code, as you can see there, select register, and you will be up and running. The main thing on the next little part here is just to select create a new account, fill out the fields, hit continue, and then you'll be into the classroom. And that will look pretty much like this. When you first come in, all you have to do is select the AP Music Theory Bootcamp 2026 class. You can see there. And you should immediately then see a whole selection of free response questions from 1 through 6, and also a whole selection of sight singing exercises as well. So these are all automatically assessed, great for kind of independent practice and just getting some immediate feedback. So practice on your own there. So basically, we'll be diving into some of these in a bit more detail a bit later, but essentially all you have to do is click on, select one of these items, and you'll be led into the exercise itself. So aside from these tasks that you can see on the main screen here, there is also another kind of quite extensive resource that's tucked away under the software area here. So towards the top left, you can see, I'll just select that. You can open Aurelia or Musician themselves and go into the AP Music Theory specific practice kind of levels and curriculum there. Or you can also try some of your sight singing skills out in Practice First. And I'll just launch into there so you can get a bit of an idea of what that looks like. In the search bar, all you have to do is search for AP Music Theory Sight Singing, and you should get a few options that pop up here. Select that top option, and you'll see this nice little collection here that includes a whole range of sight singing activities, kind of mapped to each or most of the relevant units in the CED. If you're looking for the exam-specific materials, you can scroll right down to the bottom here. We can find some of the kind of Sight Singing 1 and Sight Singing 2 exercises, but there are lots of other goodies in here as well you might like to explore if you're wanting to work on specific kinds of things, perhaps outlining, 5 of 5 or specific vocabulary like that. What I might do now, just really briefly to give you just a bit of a feel of how this works before we unpack some of the questions themselves, is I might jump into this Sight Singing 2 question from 2025. As a precursor to this, I would like to just share this warning. My My singing abilities over the years have received, it's fair to say, mixed feedback. I'm not a vocalist. My vocal control and tone are not something to be held. But you may be able to relate to this in your own kind of sight singing efforts as well. So apologies in advance. Wish me luck. Okay, so we've come back into here, into the Music First Classroom now, and I'm just going to open this particular question for us to have a look at. As I mentioned, we will be unpacking this in a little bit more detail shortly. So all I'm going to do here is the question is ready to go. I'm going to select Start Recording in the top right there, and then I'll have a go at it. I'll try and make maybe a few common mistakes, and we'll see how we go. Basically, I'll be given a tonic note followed by a count in just of dotted quarter notes there. All right, let's have a go. Ma, 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 ma. Okay, so not my finest work. You can probably understand now why I got thrown out of my grade 6 choir, but I've since moved on. So to start off with, I get some nice general feedback here. You can see I get a pitch score and a timing score. I was a bit flat overall, 30 cents flat on average. There's something for me to work on. And then to get some more specific information, I can jump in here and I can basically hover over each of these items. So where it's green, I'm doing reasonably well. Where the color changes, not so well. So obviously a bit flat at the start here. I did in fact not sing the E as I should have there, and so on. And towards the end, I did in fact sing the C sharp instead of returning to the A there right at the very end. So I just wanted to show you that really quickly to give you an idea of how that works before we jump in and start unpacking some of the goodies themselves. As I mentioned, if you do have any questions, please throw them in the comments area in the chat, and we'll try and address them as we go through. Okay, so approaching any kind of question in the AP Music Theory exam, it's really important to, I think, to address some of the information we know about that specific question, because it just kind of helps inform how we approach it and also how we spend our practice time leading up to the exam as well. So sight singing 2 question, obviously we have a limited amount of time to actually, view the melody and practice it before we have to sing. Could be in a major or minor key, treble or bass, clef, and there will be a chromatic note, typically a raised scale degree 4 or 5. Melodic intervals are mainly going to be stepwise, and the melody will start and finish on the tonic as well. Again, in terms of how to focus your energies over the next week or so leading up to the exam, again, here's just a bit of information that kind of looks back at past exams for the last 10 years. Firstly, looking at melodic intervals. So you can see like over 3/4 of this, of the melodic intervals across all these questions for sight singing 2 is actually stepwise motion. So really important to just practice singing scales, ascending, descending, those sorts of movements. And then a smaller portion is thirds, and then intervals greater than a third. In terms of chromatic notes, again, this can inform how we practice leading up to the exam. Over the last 10 years, over 3/4 of the melodies have included a raised 4th scale degree, with only a couple, less than a quarter, using a raised scale degree 5. Of course, this might not necessarily mean that something new will get thrown in this year, but based on this past information, it would be probably a good idea to focus a lot of your attention around these particular chromatic notes. Also noting that last year a raised scale degree 5 was used. Perhaps the College Board will choose to mix it up with a raised scale degree 4 this year, but we'll know more when the exam comes around. Okay, so here's the melody that we just sang in the Music First classroom. Again, identifying the key information that is already given to us in the melody is key. So we can see here, obviously, bass clef, we're given 3 sharps in the key signature. We start on A, finish on A. So as we know, we are all in the key of A major in this case. And we're given the time signature of 6/8. So immediately with this information, we can start thinking, okay, tonality in a major key, start thinking about construction of a major scale, and also start thinking about some of the kind of key, rhythmic vocabulary that we have learned in 6/8 across the year as well. So we can use that to inform how we approach this question. So the next step for me is always to then start to look for really kind of familiar vocabulary in the melody itself. Obviously, all our different teachers will probably have kind of different techniques and ways of approaching these things. And obviously, if you have been working with a specific solfege system or rhythm counting system or cadential 6/5, 6/4 labeling system, then that is something that you don't want to be changing at this point in the process. So definitely lock in and run with what you've been learning throughout the year. But hopefully some of the things we'll cover today might just open up a few additional tips and tricks to support you. But I also have no doubt that we'll be echoing many elements that your teachers have been communicating to you throughout the year. Okay, so as I said, looking for common patterns. You would have looked at lots of these throughout the year, build up lots of vocabulary, and then just trying to identify portions of stepwise motion, skips outlining thirds, diatonic chords, and of course identifying any kind of trickier parts in the melody that you might want to isolate and practice before you actually have to attempt it, including larger intervals and of course your chromatic notes. Bit of singing preparation, sing the major scale, tonic triads, outlining kind of common chord vocabulary can be really useful as well. And we'll address some of these other things as we explore this next section as well. Okay, so looking at the melody in isolation again, we can start to break it down into sections. So let's start just with the first bar here. And when I look at this, I kind of see we're obviously starting from the A, from the tonic, jumping up to the third. And then if we ignore this note, we're then going to the fifth and then back to the third. So we kind of have an A major triad here with a little passing note. So a good thing to do for this particular bar might just be to think initially about singing the tonic triad. Ma, 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 ma. And then all we have to do is think about inserting that third note, the D. Ma, 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 ma. The other thing that comes to mind when I sing these pitches, not so much the rhythm, is kind of common, songs that you might be able to relate to this. And the song that kind of comes to mind here is, of course, When the Saints. Oh, when the saints come, oh, when the saints come marching. So you can kind of, identify little bits of the melody, those fragments that you may already be super familiar with in other kind of, songs and melodies. So that can be one way to kind of approach that. And I'll move on to my next slide that kind of just has a few more items here outlining the things that we might look at. So as I mentioned, tonic triad plus the one extra little passing note there, the D. And then we can move on and look at some of these other tricky bits. So for me, some of the larger leaps with my limited vocal abilities can be particularly challenging. So the first one that crops up here is jumping from scale degree 3 up to scale degree 6 here. So, and you might be referring to these as mi and la, all those sorts of things, whatever system you're using, it's great, just run with that. So one technique that is sometimes applied to these sorts of larger intervals is to kind of sing up and down the scale between those scale degrees to basically create an outline. And then you can hopefully reference the starting note and sorry, the lower note and the higher note, or vice versa. So for me, if I go back to my A major scale again, ma 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 ma. So that's on the C sharp at the moment. Ma 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 ma. So hopefully on the F sharp there. I should check that I haven't drifted too far from the our tonic. Let me just get a little reference here. I sadly do not have perfect pitch. Ma. Okay, not too bad. So C sharp, ma 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 ma. So by singing up and down the scale like that, it kind of gives you the opportunity to outline that interval if you're not able to immediately kind of hear it or hear the kind of the target scale degree. So that's one way of kind of approaching that, and then you can kind of piece it together. Ma 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 ma, and then we obviously stepwise ma ba do ba. Another interval of a perfect fourth here, this time going from scale degree 5 up to scale degree 1. Again, both of these notes are part of the tonic triad, so if you've been singing that, hopefully you'll be able to kind of hear that interval there. And then moving into these last two bars, it's kind of great to make the observation that it is all basically stepwise motion from here to the end and largely descending. Of course, the little trick in here is our raised scale degree 5. Depending on the context of the chromatic note, which it could be as like a, in this case, it's kind of like a chromatic neighbor tone. It could be like a chromatic passing tone in some cases, excuse me, or there are a few other kinds of contexts here. But in this particular case, it is used as a chromatic neighbor tone. So one good technique can, again, be to sing down the scale, approaching this note, but then sing its kind of unaltered version of it, and then get used to altering that. So if we imagine we're singing down from our A, ma, so I'm going to sing down the scale basically, but instead of singing an E sharp, we're going to sing an E natural. Ma 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 ma. Okay, so ma 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 ma, and this time we're going to alter that note, considering that we're basically, our target is to move back to the F sharp. Ma 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 ma, and this time we'll alter that note. So ma 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 ma. So I'm sure you can hear the difference, but just once again, I'll sing the unaltered version and then the altered version. Ma 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 ma. So hopefully that's kind of clear. As I said, the key thing here for me is knowing that the F sharp scale degree 6 is basically our kind of target note either side of this chromatically altered note. So hanging on to that scale degree 6 is our kind of target note, and just using that E sharp to kind of color that can be a really good way to approach this. So moving on from there, we obviously then just have a nice little descending run from scale degree 5 down the scale to our tonic. Ma 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 ma. All right, straight down the scale there towards the end. So I hope that helps. We might jump back into the question itself in the Music First classroom and just attempt it one more time. You can obviously do this yourself after the session and have a really good go at exploring each of these techniques. But I hope each of those kind of again, techniques for tackling any of those tricky bits there can be a really, really good way to approach that. All right, let's have another attempt at our melody here. Ma 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 All right, let's see if we went a bit better this time. Oh no, That did not let me go and check this out. It may, the stream may be toying with me here, but let me try it again. Ma, 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 ma. Let's see how we went this time. Okay, I'm drifting from the metronome. It must be picking up what it is hearing from my headphones, I'm afraid, which is causing us grief. But hopefully you will agree that my attempt there was a little better than my initial attempt, which I can always come back to my attempts over here under the star and see what's going on there. And obviously I can also play back my audio there. I will not torture you with that again right now, but when you play with this yourself, definitely have a play around with some of those different settings. Do as many attempts as you want, listen back and do a bit of self-analysis and see how you're going there. Okay, so finally, as a bit of a summary, a few key points there that we've already stepped through, but obviously just grabbing any of that information that we already know about this question type, how it appears in the AP Music Theory exam, identifying key, clef, meter, all those sort of things, and then tackling any of the trickier parts in the melody so that we can practice them prior to actually attempting them. Doing a bit of singing preparation, and then this final point here is obviously not something that I'm great at, but just using your breath support, trying to not take shallow kind of breaths here, breathing down, inhaling deeply, exhaling slowly, and trying to use that kind of diaphragm support there as well. Okay, hopefully that all helps a bit. So the next question type we're going to move on to, we do have time, which is excellent, is the free response question from the 2025 exam, free response 6, part writing question. Obviously, part writing has many different rules that you have no doubt been exploring during the year. It can sometimes be a bit overwhelming with the number of different kind of combinations and possibilities, but I'm sure you've built up some great vocabulary and knowledge to use here. Again, free response 6 or free response 5 and 6 will commonly include some kind of chromatic chord in there, whether it's a secondary dominant or a secondary leading tone chord. Again, just looking at some information from prior past exams, which might help inform how you spend your practice time leading up to the exam. In terms of the chromatic chord that has been used over the last 10 plus years, you can see there are a couple of standouts. 565 approaching 4 and 543 approaching 2. So they've kind of been used most commonly. Again, this doesn't mean that's what's going to be used on the exam this year, but seeing the kind of spread of different chromatic chords that are used, that might help you decide which ones you really want to practice with. And again, a lot of these will appear in the practice resources in the Music First classroom as well for you, so you'll be able to attempt them there. So again, as I mentioned, lots of different part writing rules that can be a little bit overwhelming. Generally, these kind of 6 kind of key points here will, in most cases, help you address this question really well and get good results. There are a few kind of key things. Obviously, the chord spelling is paramount. As we all know, if you misspell a chord, then you lose not only points on the spelling of the chord, but you also lose voice leading marks in and out of that chord. So really important to get your chord spelling correct. Of course, aiming for smooth lines, stepwise contrary motion will again mean that you avoid a lot of other common errors, parallel fifths, parallel octaves, hidden fifths, hidden octaves, and so on. So contrary motion or oblique motion, which is often achieved by retaining common pitches where possible, will also help you avoid those kinds of errors. Obviously, one of the key ones, don't double the leading tone or the chordal seventh, and be aware of just how you need to resolve the chordal seventh and also your leading tones. So chordal seventh always has to be resolved down by descending step. Okay, so this is the question as it appeared in the exam last year. Again, obviously we're in the key of A flat, and we can see we have a few kind of key, kind of common harmonic vocabulary items here that you may have addressed already through the year. So the first one that comes to mind covers those first three chords there with a passing 6/4 chord. Really common progression. I'm sure you've looked at that. But again, when you're approaching any of these sorts of questions, it is, really great if you can identify some of this vocabulary straight off, because you probably already have techniques, strategies in place to address those. Here's our chromatic chord, which we'll kind of look at the spelling of in a moment, and then a fairly common predominant movement from chord 4, chord 2, 6, 5 in first inversion, and then finishing on the dominant chord. So again, there are many techniques and strategies here. One that you see quite often that many instructors recommend is to start by just spelling out all your diatonic chords in the key of A flat major. So you have that as a reference. And I'll flick onto my next slide here. So A flat major, I have just spelled out each Roman numeral. I have included sevenths on the 2 chord and also on the 5/7 chord here. I've left them off the others. They're most common on the 2 chord and the 5/7 and the 5 chord. You can include them elsewhere if you choose to. And then basically I have just spelled out my scale. So my A flat major scale here, A flat, B flat, C, D flat, E flat, F, and G, and then stacked thirds on top of that. So each row is just representing stacked thirds for the key there. So that can be a really good reference point as we start to spell out the chords. Okay, so next what I've done is under each chord, I have just spelled it out using what we just did in the previous slide to basically identify each chord in root position. So A flat chord here, a 5 chord, this is an E flat chord, and so on. So these are all diatonic chords apart from chord 4 here. So let's just address this quickly. Again, I'm sure you've spent plenty of time on these, but how do we figure out what this chord is exactly? So we look at our target chord, which is the 4 chord, which we can see over here. And this is our target temporary key. So we kind of have to imagine we're going temporarily to the key of, in this case, D flat major. So if we're in A flat major and we need to find out what the chord 4 is, we can obviously just count up. So A flat, B flat, C, D flat. So that's the 4 chord in the key of A flat major. And then we have to consider in the key of D flat major, what are the different pitches? So in D flat major, if we think of our key signature there, it has 5 flats. It includes an additional flat, G flat major. So you can use that again here. So thinking about D flat major is our target temporary kind of tonic here, temporary home key. What is the 5 chord of D flat major? And again, we can count up D flat, E flat, F, G flat, and then A flat. So that's scale degree 5 here. And you'll see here, that's exactly what I've mapped out. So A flat, C, E flat, and then drawing from the key of D flat, we have included our chordal 7th here, which is our G flat major. So I hope that makes sense. You can use that same technique when you're trying to figure out how to spell any chromatic chord. Figure out your target kind of temporary tonic and kind of work backwards from there. Okay, so the next thing that's commonly done once you have this kind of rough spelling map is to identify the root notes. So the notes that are going to be in the bass rather. So you might choose to just circle them or put little triangles around them like I have in this case. So I've kind of identified all of these, and you'll note immediately that if you kind of look at it, they actually form a really nice ascending stepwise motion. A flat to B flat, C stays on the C for another note, D flat, and then up to E flat. So I'm kind of immediately thinking about a nice ascending line here in my bass voice. Okay, so next up, probably essential to do is to identify any chordal 7ths. So chordal 7ths only occur on 2 of the chords here. And as we noted, these have to be resolved in a really specific way. So our chordal seventh here is G flat, which has to resolve down by step to our F, and our chordal seventh here is A flat, again has to resolve down by step to the G natural here. So these are kind of very set rules. There are only a couple of exceptions where you don't need to resolve down by step from the chordal seventh, and those exceptions don't really appear in this particular progression, so we don't need to worry about them. So next up is just about identifying our leading notes, leading tones, so that we can resolve them correctly. Again, here in the key of A flat, our 7th scale degree, our leading note is in fact G, and we're on a 5 chord here. So the strongest resolution here is for the G to move to an A flat, but it can also, depending on which voice you're in, resolve down to an E flat as well. Similarly, on our kind of temporary 5 chord here in the key of D flat major, we do have our C, which functions as the leading note there. Given that the C is in the bass and that we're going to D flat straight after this, we have no choice but to make that resolution from our leading note to our temporary tonic here. All right, so I hope that kind of makes sense. We'll come back to this summary at the moment, but now what we'll do is we'll apply this kind of process and this knowledge in the Music First classroom to the automatically assessed question there. All right, so this question has already been mapped out for you. Again, there are lots of other kind of free response 1 through 6 little worksheets here that you can attempt. I will note that these are actually also, they also all draw from question pools. So you can actually, in some cases, attempt them multiple times. But I'm going to jump into this one, free response 6, 4-part writing from 2025. And we'll see if we can apply some of the knowledge that we just worked through. Okay, so here is our question. I'll just zoom in a little bit here. So I think typically it's really great to start with the bass part, get that really locked in. So all I'm going to do here is just select voice 2 here, and I've already got my rhythmic value selected. As we said from our previous kind of chart we looked at, the bass part here provides a beautiful opportunity for a really nice ascending line. So we can go here, and I'll just bring that chart up again here so we can jump back to it if we need to. So our nice ascending line here, A flat, B flat, C, C, D flat, D flat, E flat, etc. Okay, so let's start by inputting that. And then we have our 2 C's up to the D flat. Stay on the D flat there as the 2 chord appears in second inversion, and then finish on the 5 chord. I will replace this with a half note here. Now, typically, I would generally suggest jumping now to the soprano part. And in this context, you can then work on creating a kind of contrary line to your bass part here, which is a really nice way to kind of set yourself up for success. And as I said, potentially avoid some of those nasty parallel, fifths, parallel octaves, and so on. So what we're going to do here is, again, I selected voice 1 and back to my rhythmic value. This chord progression, as I mentioned before, is quite common, and it provides often a nice opportunity for kind of a voice interchange. So what that means is, whilst we have an ascending line here, we can have a nice descending line in the top, in the soprano. And what we'll see here is, whilst we start on the A here, the A flat, we end up on the A flat over here. And whilst we start on the C here, we end up on the C over here. And our B flats kind of meet nicely in the middle. So that progression often lends itself really nicely to that sort of motion. There are kind of other options here, but this can be a really good one to work with. So moving on to our chromatic chord here. So what I might do is, again, just thinking about our melodic line here, the bass part stays on the C, so there's no move here, oblique motion. But again, thinking about our descending line here, this might be a good opportunity to bring in the main kind of chromatic note. So if we come back here, we can see we have our G flat here, and we know it has to resolve nicely to an F. So that gives us a really nice opportunity to insert that into the melodic line. So I'll choose my flat here and pop in my G flat. As we just said, this has to resolve to the F here. And from here, we have a kind of a few different options. Maybe for now, we will stay on the F and then perhaps jump back to the G, the chordal third on our final chord there. I will try and throw in a few little errors as we go along, just so we can see how this check my answer option here can help you as you go along. All right, so now typically it can be great to move into the alto voice. So again, I'll select voice 2. If you do need to ever, like remove any voices, you can of course select the eraser there, or you can actually also, use this rhythmic value here to kind of just replace an existing note as well, like so. All right, so with voice 2 selected, I'm going to start to work on my alto part here. Again, great idea to always coming back to our reference chart here to make sure that we are ticking off each note in our chord that we need to spell. You can, of course, like draw little lines through these as you go to make sure you have included them all, and also kind of address any kind of doubling or omission that you might need to apply. Okay, so the alto and the poor altos and the poor tenors, for better or worse, often get the kind of slightly more boring lines. There is no need to be massively creative here. So if there's opportunity for me to stay on the same note, excuse me, I will certainly take that on. So this E flat does appear in both of these chords, and I can, of course, then also hang on to it here as well when I get to my 1/6 chord. All right, so moving on to our next chord here. So I think we figured out this is essentially the notes we're looking for here are A flat, C, E flat, and our G flat. So I've already got the C, I've already got the G flat. So once again, I can hang on to my E flat here, keep maintaining this common tone. I'm clearly not going to win any composition awards here for my alto part, but that's okay. Okay, so finally getting into our last bar here, we have to kind of address a few items. So again, we have a D flat and an F. The kind of smoothest voice leading here is to go down by step to the D flat again. I can double this on this chord, and you'll note that the bass is still ascending. So I can descend here in my alto part along with the soprano without any risk of any kind of parallels or anything nasty like that. And then we might throw in a little bit of an error here just to see what crops up. So in our kind of 2-6-5 chord here, we could insert a D flat. That is certainly in the chord. It does appear down here as well, which may cause us some issues, but we'll have a look at that in a minute. And then I'll go up to my E flat here as well in the final chord. So we'll see what errors that brings up shortly, but hopefully you're already thinking about some of the errors that might be occurring there. Okay, so now we're going to address the tenor line. So I will jump back to voice 1 to enter my tenor line, and let's have a look at the notes we've currently got in here. So again, if we come back to our kind of reference that we mapped out here, you can see we need an E flat, a G, and a B flat. Currently have the B flat, we have 2 B flats, which is super common on a 5-6-4 chord, and we have our E, so we need to insert a G natural here. Again, you can see that basically the bass is ascending, so this is not going to cause any issues in terms of parallels with my bass part. The alto is on the same note, oblique motion, and the soprano is descending as well. So it can be useful just to check here to make sure I'm not ending up with any parallels between my soprano and my tenor part, but these are basically moving in thirds. So I've got a C and an A flat, and a B flat and a G. So I'm pretty safe there, which is great. Okay, let's now jump in and work on this chord 3 here. Again, we come back to our tonic chord in first inversion. So we have a C and A flat, an E flat, and another A flat. So we have spelled out the chord nicely. We do have the chordal tonic or root is doubled there. And again, if we look at just checking for any kinds of parallel motion, we can see we do have parallel motion with the bass part, but the interval that we have here is actually a sixth. So we are all good, and the other voices move in contrary motion or oblique motion. So again, we are all good and laughing here. Moving on to chord 4, you can see here the only note we're actually missing from this chord, as we identified before from our little reference diagram, is the A flat. So now we have, going from the bottom of the chord up, thinking of it in root position, we have an A flat, a C, an E flat, and a G flat. Okay, moving on now. Again, so limited motion here again, so we're feeling pretty safe. It's only really the soprano part that moves. Everything else stays static, so there's no risk of any parallels here. Okay, so for our last couple of chords, we kind of just have to figure out how we want to spell this 4 chord. So again, looking at what we've got a D flat, we have another D flat and an F. The only missing note here is our A flat that we can identify here from our diagram. So again, I'm going to keep that in the same voice, nice and simple. No chance of getting any other kind of parallels occurring, given that everything else is moving either in kind of contrary motion to the bass or in thirds here in our upper parts. So nice and simple. And to finish off our last 2 chords, again, D flat and a D flat and an F. We will make an error here, so we might, let's say we just pop in another A flat here, and let's perhaps into something like as our chord. I'll tell you what we'll do. We'll actually change this to be a B flat here, and then we will we'll keep the B flat here in our last chord. So let's do a little check my answer here, and hopefully you might have already identified some of the errors that will appear in the last section here, but I'll hit check my answer. Okay, so we can see here musician has identified a few parallel octaves, basically our D flat here going up to the E flat. So we need to resolve this in a different way. And you can see here we've also managed to omit the chordal 7th from this chord. So this is something that we'll have to resolve, and we might want to think about kind of revoicing this last chord as well. So what we're going to do here is, I think we'll mainly mess with just our last couple of notes here, and we might actually bring the A flat into the upper part. So I'm just going to select edit my answer, and again I'll move back to voice 1. I'm going to edit my soprano part here to get my A flat back into this second last chord. Okay, so now I can basically, that is my chordal 7th there that has to resolve down to the G. So that's all good. I've pretty much got this chord spelled out nicely, but I still have an issue here. So let's have a look. I also have this, I'm not in AP music theory mode here actually, so this preparation is a little bit different, as in the rule set is not set up for AP music theory for this particular question. But I'll show you basically what happens here. We've still got this essentially a parallel going on here, and I can't omit any notes from this second last chord. So contrary to what I just said prior to that, let's just adjust this one. And this time we might go up to the F here in the alto voice. Okay, so basically you can see now we have this chord spelled out. From its root we have a B flat, a D flat, an F, and an A flat, and we have our chordal seventh here, resolving down to the G. So I can check my answer here. You can ignore this particular error, which is actually passed by the AP Music Theory curriculum in preparation here. This is actually allowed. So we have multiple rule sets basically set up for different systems, and you can in fact apply an AP Music Theory rule set to these questions. And I'll make sure that is set up in the Music First classroom for you, so you don't have to be confused by these errors. But as you can see, overall we did pretty well. We got 94%. We would have got 100% if you exclude this rule. So we are just about at the end of the session here. I'm just having a quick look in the chat to see if there are any other questions or comments. If you do have anything, now could be a good time to throw it in there. If not, I'll just come back really quickly and just address a few other things in the classroom. I did want to point out that any of the sight singing exercises, even if you're doing exercises in the bass or the treble, you can actually sing in any octave that best suits your voice type. So don't feel as though if you're a bass and you dial up a question that's in treble, you don't have to sing it in that exact range. You can do that in a different octave for sure. So I would encourage you to explore all the resources in the Music First classroom. There's lots and lots of great automatically assessed free practice resources there. This is all open through till May 30. So obviously you'll be done and dusted with the exam by that time and probably won't want to even think about some of these items, but they are there for you to explore if you're interested beyond the exam. Now you will note also just a really quick summary here for free response 6. As we mentioned, really important, chord spelling essential, and then as we mapped out our diatonic chords, identifying the bass notes, chordal sevenths, and leading tones, and identifying how they must resolve. Then entering our bass part, entering the soprano part, following up with the inner voices, and doing a bit of checking of spelling and voice leading as you go. Will be set you up for success without necessarily having to consider every rule that appears as part of the kind of 4-part writing rule set and canon. So hopefully that will be useful for you. For any teachers, instructors that have joined us today, if you do want to have a kind of broader look at the tools and the offering, you'll see I've got a QR code up here. You'll also see in the top left of the webinar window, there is also a trial sign up QR code there as well. So feel free to scan that and pop that away to explore further, or actually get set up with a formal trial. I can't see any other questions in the chat at this point that we haven't kind of already addressed in the webinar. I would wish you all good luck. Hope everything goes super well for the exam next week. As I said, obviously all the tools and everything, vocabulary that you've learned through the year will hopefully set you up for success. And I'm sure you'll be able to apply that on exam day in a really useful way. Hopefully some of the things we've looked at today can also help you, I guess, approach things in a really confident kind of way. So I will sign off for now, but I really appreciate you attending. This webinar will be shared, and the recording will be on YouTube and also on Facebook for anyone who wants to revisit it at any other time. So feel free to pass it on to fellow students, colleagues, etc. But take care. That's it from me, and best of luck. Bye.